Stanley from the Open University.
Thanks, Padma. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, and from experience, mine is a little bit slow, so just bear with me. Any moment now, it should come up. It's just taking its time. Right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let me just move that out of the way. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to my presentation. I'm here today to talk to you about my creation of the Open University's Inclusive and Accessible Social Media Guide. But first, I thought I'd start with a little bit of background information about myself, what I do, and what led to the creation of the guide that I'll be talking about today. So this is me. My name's Tyne. Unfortunately, the name didn't arrive from me being born in Newcastle. I'm actually named after an American actress called Tyne Daly. Social media, this is myself. I started my career working as a social media manager for various agencies, but then decided I wanted to work in the more of an academic setting, which led me to where I am today at the Open University. And here's a picture of our wonderful building, library building in Milton Keynes. And I now work there as part of their communications and insight team. And part of my role involves managing the library's social media team, who we call the social media heroes. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background about the OU. As you might already know, we're known for being a provider of open and distance learning, and not just in the UK. Since we launched in 1969, we've had more than 2.2 million people worldwide study with us. And there really is no typical OU student. People of all ages and backgrounds do study with us. For example, 72% work full or part-time during their studies. 26% of our UK undergraduates live in the 25% most deprived areas, and 34% of our new undergrads are under 25. We're also the largest provider of higher education for people with disabilities. And this last point leads us on quite nicely to what led me to be here today. So one thing I've noticed over the years, having worked in digital marketing, is that brands being accessible on social media really is quite rare. It's unfortunately the exception rather than the norm. And now working for the Open University, where inclusivity and being open to all is part of our values, we really need this to be our norm, so as many people as possible can enjoy and connect with our content. Now, there's a lot of advice out there on how to incorporate equality, diversity, and inclusion on social media, but not everyone has the time to research it. My team of social media heroes, for example, they all actually volunteer to create social media content for us in addition to everyday roles. So their time is really precious. So what I thought I'd do is it'd be really useful to bring together all of these resources in kind of one central hub. So the result of this, I developed a best practice guide for our content creators to use, which has lots of tips on how to make our social media inclusive and accessible. And we're going to make this publicly available so that we can share it with other social media content creators across the OU and beyond to help them to do the same thing. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to give you a little preview of how the guide is laid out and what exactly it entails. So just to know, I am by no means an expert in digital accessibility. Everything I've actually learned is basically from reading about it online and going to a couple of webinars. So the guide is actually the result of a hugely collaborative effort to ensure it features a range of expertise. So as well as having help from my own team, I had input from other teams within the library, as well as the accessibility and usability evaluation team, the EDI team within People Services, and the central social media team. We also had several people from outside of the university contributing, which included a library marketing trainer and AbilityNet, who are experts in digital accessibility. Now, the guide certainly won't be static. It will continually be updated to feature the latest tips and best practice. We all know that things change ridiculously fast online, and we'll always welcome feedback. If there's anything missing from the guide or anything we could include to make it better, we want to know, and we won't get upset if anything we've included doesn't expand upon the detail that people want. So there's basically 6 sections of the guide, which I'll take you through now. So the first section is promoting diversity inclusion. So as I mentioned, we're a global university and it's so important that our content appeals to a variety of audiences and is representative of our diverse community and culture. So the guide contains some of the things that anyone would need to know to ensure that their content also promotes diversity and inclusion. There's guidance on things like diversifying imagery and icons, using inclusive language, making sure you share multiple voices and perspectives, and always thinking globally. The next section is all about how to make text accessible. It really is so important online to consider how text and language comes across to a variety of different people. So we've got tips for inclusive text design. So this has recommendations on things like how to format hashtags, how to use emojis, what typeface to use in images, and including trigger warnings for sensitive topics. The next section is all about how to make images accessible. So it includes an explanation of the difference between alt text and image descriptions and what each of those should entail. There's also some best practice guidelines for how to write image descriptions and alt text so that people can visualize the images. And there's also lots of examples given. The next section is all about videos and how to make them accessible. So there's an explanation of the difference between subtitles and captions, closed versus open captions, and what exactly they should entail. There's guidance on how to include video captions and subtitles across the primary social media platforms that we use. There's best practice for how to do online subtitling. And there's a list of different ways that you can provide video descriptions, which are things like descriptive audio, descriptive transcript, and live described video. There's also some other design considerations, such as colour and contrast. So, when designing accessible social media content, a really important consideration is the colours that you use. And knowing if a colour choice is accessible comes down to the colour contrast and the ratio between your background and your foreground colours. So, the guide actually contains specific tips when it comes to colour and contrast on social. Additionally, when you create video content, it's so important to be aware that animations with flickers or movement can actually trigger epileptic seizures. And it's also quite annoying and distracting in general. So the guide has things to consider when you're creating these animations. There is also some specific recommendations from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. As I mentioned previously, there really is a hell of a lot of stuff out there on how to make social media accessible and inclusive. The guide would have to be hundreds or thousands of pages to include it all, but no one has time to read it all. So basically, we've included a section at the end with lots of links to further reading for each of the different sections so that people can find out more information if they need to. So I did actually want to share with you guys a link to the guide today, but we're still currently actually in the process of trying to get it uploaded somewhere on the OU website where it can be publicly available and contain multiple versions as it gets updated. Once it is uploaded, we're going to feature a link to it somewhere on the library website, probably within the news section. And I'm going to include the URL for that at the end of the presentation if you want to catch up with it. In the meantime, though, there are some really simple things that you can start to do to make your library's social media accessible and inclusive. So I thought I'd give you a little rundown of my 5 little tips. So, tip number 1, start providing image descriptions within your post copy. And when the platform allows it, include alt text. Alt text is a really handy alternative on Twitter where the character count is really limited and it's hard to fit in those image descriptions. Make sure that they're always really clear and concise, approximately around 125 to 140 characters. Always include the relevant information and mention colour if you think it's important. You don't need to say image of or photograph of at the beginning. Screen readers, for example, will make it known to the user that it is an image. You can also make sure that you front load any important information. Tip number 2, make your hashtags accessible. So whenever you're using multi-word hashtags, make sure you use camel case. So make sure you capitalize the first letter of each word. It helps the words to get read out correctly by a screen reader, and it also makes them easier to read in general. Whenever you're using hashtags, try to put them at the end if you can so that they don't disrupt the post copy. And also be mindful how other things such as punctuation marks and at mentions can also disrupt post copy. And wherever possible, at mentions, for example, try to put them at the end so they don't disrupt anything. Tip number 3, whenever you're creating images, try not to use too much text. And I know that's not always easy with social. So when you do need to use text, make sure it's a decent size and you use a font that is easy to read. And as mentioned earlier, always ensure there's sufficient contrast between the image and the text color. WebAIM actually has a really handy and easy to use online contrast checker where you basically enter your foreground and your background color and it tells you if it passes their guidelines. If it passes their guidelines, you know it's really good for accessibility. And also make sure that you always provide a text alternative within the post copy. Tip number 4, always provide captions for your videos. Some general guidance I can give you for captions is try not to include any more than 2 lines per caption. Make sure that you allow enough time for each caption to be read, so it's on the screen for long enough, but obviously not too long. Make sure that the captions are in a large text size and a clear font, so it's easy to read. Make sure you indicate any relevant sound effects or music in lowercase italics, enclosed in brackets. And try to make sure that your captions don't obscure any visual content. And tip number 5, lastly, but by no means least, diversify your imagery. Make sure that they represent. There are some really great free image sites out there that contain inclusive images. An example I could give you is one called Disabled in Here. There's actually a link to it within the presentation. And make sure that you steer clear of any images that depict stereotypes. Also, be aware of the language that you use. Never assume anything. And make sure that you keep up to date with inclusive language guides to make sure the language you use is appropriate. Language is something that always changes, and words change as time goes on. But there are lots of guides online that will kind of keep you updated, and I've got some links to that within the guide and within this presentation. And lastly, think globally. For instance, celebrate holidays and special days that aren't just your own, and always make sure that you share multiple voices and perspectives. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd be really happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you, Tyne. That was really interesting, and I'm sure really useful to a lot of people. I think a lot of us will be looking for that guide in your links in the presentation. Really good. So if we've got any questions, if you could raise your hand, we'll come to you, and we'll if you can unmute yourself, that'd be great, and then you can ask your question. Okay, I'll ask one whilst we're waiting for people if they're having a think about it, because we've got plenty of time, haven't we? Yeah. I just wanted to ask, currently, the people that do your social media, is that a team of people? Is it one person? Does it rotate? So there are lots of people to train to do this, or how do you do that, and how does that work at the OU?
Well, I mean, so the social media that I manage is the library social media. So if you go and look for Open University, there's lots of different accounts, but my one specifically is the libraries. And we have a team of social media heroes, which is about 5 different people. And basically they're in charge of basically doing one post a week and related to kind of their area. So it might be archives, it might be research support. So currently they only have to do one post a week. So what we do in terms of trying to get them to incorporate this stuff, they've all had the guide for a little while. We've done lots of revisions with it. I meet with them once a month and we kind of talk through some top tips and things like that. But it's kind of bearing in mind that everyone's very busy. It's hard to do, and it's hard to do everything perfectly. It's kind of taking things slow and gradually making things better and better. So sometimes people will forget to do image descriptions. Sometimes people will forget to make sure that check the color contrast, things like that. And it's not something that people get told off for. It's just we remind them. We have these monthly meetings where we go through it. And if anyone has any questions, obviously they can ask, but it's kind of a gradual process. No one can kind of read this guide and be like, yes, I know exactly how to do it. It's all perfect. It's very gradual. And what I found over the last couple of months, for example, that people have kind of got better and better with doing it as time has gone on and they've seen the benefits of doing it. So that's kind of how we do it as a team.
Yeah, I can see that, and I imagine that the people doing it gain that confidence, like you say, and get that more sort of experience and expertise and feel better about what they're posting, and obviously, you know, that they can then advise new people that come onto the team and stuff like that. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see some of the things that you suggest in there, because obviously all of us, all the libraries, they all have social media, but we don't always know exactly what's the right thing to do. And like, I didn't know that thing about the camel case hashtag thing, which is obviously really interesting. But
yeah,
great.
that's a funny one actually, because, you know, obviously for accessibility purposes it's great, but also just in general, I mean, people have probably seen those times where people have used hashtags and people have completely misread them because they're all in lowercase.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it benefits everyone.
So we've got a question, Kirsty. Thank you. If you can unmute yourself, and you can ask the question.
Thanks so much. Hi, Tyne. Thank you so much.
Hi.
That was so helpful. I'm Kirsty. I'm from Durham University Library and Collections. I was just, because we've done quite a bit of work recently about social media and obviously making sure that we're getting the most engagement with our users, specifically students, you know, between the ages of 18 and 25. And just because obviously you mentioned about flashing images and things jumping around on screen, and obviously the more trends that are coming around with using stories and lots of stickers and things jumping around, which are obviously very popular. How do you sort of find the balance between those elements that are quite popular and engaging with the student body, and find the balance with it remaining accessible to those?
That's a really good question, actually, and it's very hard to find that balance because, like you said, there is new stuff all the time, and it's becoming more and more flashy and popular and things like that. So, our kind of approach to it is, I mean, I wouldn't say like our social media isn't like really ahead of the times. It's not like really advanced. We don't do all the new stuff that's available just because, you know, we kind of have stuck with what we've done and it's worked quite well. But the best way I would say to approach it, which is kind of what we're doing, is a kind of a bit of trial and error. So maybe, like, say with animations, for example, we didn't used to do animations. It used to always be images, and we want to try and do more of that, more video content. So what we're kind of doing is we're kind of starting off with very basic animation, and kind of, you know, seeing how that works, sending it to other teams within the university to check. Okay, I mean, we've got teams that are specifically just for accessibility purposes. So we might send it to them and kind of say, you know, does this follow guidelines? Is it okay? Is it too much, too little? And that is really beneficial kind of for us to know what is, you know, what is appropriate and what's not. So it is a very difficult one. There kind of is no wrong or right answer. You can't upload a video to something and it says, yep, perfect, or yep, no, that's wrong. It's kind of just little baby steps, trying out little things, maybe sharing it with other people that you know are expertise in that area, or going to, like I said, the WebAIM is really good. They've got lots of tools. And actually, I didn't include within that guide, but there is actually a tool, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's like a photosensitive tool where it gives you guidelines for making sure that the videos are accessible and they're not going to cause any issues. So that's a good place to start as well. But yeah, I'd say trial and error, little steps, trying things out and getting help from sort of other experts about it.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much, Tyne.
No problem at all. Thank you for your question.
Great, thanks, Kirsty. Has anybody else got any questions? Anything else? Okay, if no one's got any questions, obviously you can always get in touch with any of our presenters. All the details are in our attendees brochure. So we'll thank Tyne now for now, and we'll move on to the next presentation. So thanks very much, Tyne. And
thanks, bye guys.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Amazing, thank you, Tyne. I'll just get up our presentation.
Great, so our next presentation today is from Sonia, Edwards and Laura Riley, is that right? Riella from Edge Hill. So I'll hand over to them for their presentation. So yeah, just get set up.
Perhaps hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make a start. So yeah, so it's sort of very similar actually to Tyne's presentation today about social media. But in particular, our presentation today is going to be looking at what we've done at Edge Hill University, and specifically within library and learning services, and our agenda at working towards 100% accessible content across the university. So in particular today we're going to talk about our Build Accessible campaign. So just as introductions, my name is Laura Riella and I'm the Digital Training Manager. So I'm based in the Learning Technology Development team, so the LTD team in Library and Learning Services. I'll let Sonia introduce herself.
Hello, yes, I'm Sonia Edwards and I'm part of the Academic Engagement team. I manage that team and communicate the work that Laura does and her team does to the rest of the university.
Right, I'll just go to your next slide, Sonia.
Hello, so the aim is to show how our learning services departments work together really to promote accessibility across the university. And this is mainly promoting to staff across the university about how to make their work accessible to all. So we're going to introduce by talking about the accessibility legislation and our software, which is Blackboard Ally. And I'm going to go into the campaign and show how the technology works, and Laura will take over that bit, and how we communicated it to the needs of the customers. And then we'll go beyond that and how it evolved and became part and parcel of our everyday activity by talking about our accessibility network and how we celebrate our success. So starting with introduction to accessibility and legislation. So as you probably all know, the government accessibility regulations came in, and it means that improvements have to be made on all websites, internal and external. And the aim is that content is accessible for all users, irrelevant of their device that they use, and can be also linked to any of the common assistive technology like screen magnifiers, screen readers, speech recognition tools, etc., captions included. So that came as quite a surprise to some of the academics, I would say. So we had to be quite nice in our approach, take steps. We knew we had to promote some training. We knew we had to put information on our wiki pages. We also rebranded quite a lot of our content. I know what Tam was saying before about contrast. Our main university pages changed from purple to blue. We also created exemplars for the academics to have a look at. That included lots of learning design and inclusive by design templates. So this was the start of our campaign, really, pushed by legislation. But as I said before, it did evolve into something else, which we'll come to. But first of all, Laura's going to tell you all about our software that we required called Ally.
Yeah, so as Sonia mentioned, obviously, with the upcoming accessibility legislation at that point, we were quite conscious that we needed to obviously support staff across the university in terms of making all of their content accessible. So not only the university's external web pages, but also the internal web pages for staff, so our wiki pages, but actually making content accessible means all of the content that's put on the our virtual learning environment. So in our case at Edgehill, we have Blackboard. So what sort of came about initially was Blackboard Ally, which is an extension, it's an additional product to Blackboard, the virtual learning environment. And Blackboard Ally is a tool basically that allows staff, when they upload content onto Blackboard, to be able to see the accessibility of that document. So it comes up and it will identify if you're in the red, amber or green, and it provides really useful feedback actually. So if you are in red and your content is only 0% accessible, for example, it does provide staff with some quite tangible improvements. So this document needs headings, it needs alt text applying to images. But Blackboard Ally isn't just for staff. Even though it's a great tool for staff in terms of flagging up any issues, it really encourages and promotes staff when they upload any content to make it accessible. It's also fantastic for students as well, in terms of being able to access alternate versions. So, for example, if a member of staff uploaded into their new module, their module handbook, using Blackboard Ally, it gives students the little Ally icon next to the document, and it will allow them to access it in an alternative version. So, for example, they can access the Word document as a PDF, they can access it on a web page, they can use and access it as text to speech as well. So Ally was a really key tool actually in supporting staff, and I think making us as a service a lot more aware of that platform and of accessibility needs. And throughout, we were very keen to collect student and staff feedback to really ensure that we're using Blackboard Ally as best as we can, we're promoting it, and we're really raising awareness about accessibility. And that's where the Build Accessible campaign came into effect. So Build Accessible is, hopefully as the title suggests, it's about building accessible from the beginning. So as Tan mentioned in her previous presentation, anything that you produce, we should always have accessibility in mind. So any content that you produce, rather than making improvements after you've uploaded it onto Blackboard, for example, having to redo the entire document, adding headings, adding alt text, we really tried to create an ethos at the university that was, right, if you're going to create a new document, from the beginning, have accessibility in mind. And I think as Sonia will talk about in a moment, it really was about changing the mentality amongst staff, making them more aware of accessibility needs, and of the importance of why headings are so important to include, and why alt text is really vital. So as a result of the Build Accessible campaign, one of the things we did was we created some student-facing web pages as well. Because again, you're conscious, even though myself and Sonia predominantly work with staff at the university, we've got very much staff-focused roles. Actually, it was really important to consider students as well, to raise their awareness of accessibility, what Blackboard Ally can do for them too. So one of the first things that we actually did, thinking about Build Accessible, thinking about the legislation, and thinking about how we've got this tool, one of the first things we did was created an online staff development toolkit for staff, specifically focused on accessibility. And this toolkit came sort of at the very beginning of the pandemic in April 2020. So when we first started working from home, after March, it was one of the first major projects that I really did in terms of developing a toolkit. So within this accessibility toolkit, we really wanted to use this as a place to direct staff to in particular. It was in response to the legislation, and it was also in the growing need from staff that they wanted more support. Again, as Tan mentioned, there's so many fantastic web pages out there, but we thought of bottling it all up, putting our own Edgehill spin on it, and we aimed it to be a one-stop shop. So there was a very focused marketing campaign behind this toolkit. It was part of our online staff development offer. We created other toolkits as well at the same time on reading lists, on a variety of different research tools, on browsing, etc. But just to stay focused on the accessibility toolkit, it contains sections on how to make your PDFs accessible, how to make Word documents, PowerPoints accessible, how to make images accessible, considering contrast levels, alt text, how to make videos accessible, so again, how to add captions, web pages, social media. And this content was created by quite a lot of staff. Within the LTD team, we created various videos for staff, so short, little 5-minute videos about some key tips. Others were a bit longer videos, so if staff wanted to almost attend like an online session, they could. So that was the toolkit that we created, and again, really in response to the Build Accessible campaign. So I'll pass over to Sonia now, who's going to talk a bit about how we got it out there, so the communications behind not only the toolkit, but the other instances we have too.
Yes, so with all that information with the LTD that they passed on, it's my role with my team, the academic engagement team, to manage the relationship between learning services in each faculty in the university, and therefore we are the voice of learning services. So it's down to my team to pass on this key information to the academics so they can pass it on to their students, We also have a student academic engagement team as well. But the way we do that is in a massive amount of communications, really, as the usuals, from emails, meetings to social media. And of course, in all our formats, we had to be completely 100% accessible. So we altered and adapted, and we used everything that we had learned and shared that with the academic community. But of course, our format of our communication depended on our audience. So you can see there's a library and learning services update. That's one of our formal reports that we can email to heads of departments, programme leaders, and follow up with a meeting, perhaps, for example, as well. So give them information to look at and then consider it within a meeting. And then we'll take that to a board report as well, into the boards, and share it with staff. We can go deeper than that, and we had reports on statistics, which I'll share with you in a little minute. But also, not only was the formal reports there, we needed the informal information too, the social media, to remind people what they should be doing, to give them quick tips, as it were, to share with them our agenda, to give them our reasons. And also, we wrote quite a few blogs and linked those into our communications. It seems strange, but it made it shorter. You can send a short email with a long blog, or a short email with a short blog. But we had a lot of variation between the information that we sent out. But no matter what, our language was always very positive. We had to share our agenda and give our reasons, and we linked it to legislation. It wasn't just one of those, as Tam mentioned before, one of those things that, you know, is quite fancy and you just want to get on with it. There are reasons behind it, and those are key reasons. And we provided them with a pathway to success, really, including training and advice. Because at the end of the day, we did want them to change their behaviour. We were actually asking academics to change everything that they were used to, the way they were used to creating their modules, the way they were used to displaying their modules, the way they referred to reading lists. All that did have to change for many of them. And a lot of them at the time had to go back and change what they'd already done. And as Laura mentioned before, we wanted them to start from the very beginning, from building accessibly. So that's really useful at this time of year when they're starting afresh. In the middle of last year, in the middle of a pandemic, some of them were quite upset with our news. So hence, we had to make everything positive. And it worked. And they understand the reasons behind it. I mean, who wouldn't? You need everything to be accessible. And bringing everybody into that change of day-to-day working routine worked really well, saying that we're all in it together, saying that nobody's on their own. We were all holding hands, as it were. And we did provide those top tips that you've seen before, the quick sessions, the quick maintenance, as it were, to help people feel better, to get that positive feedback straight away, that success that it can be done. And as I mentioned before, if you move on, Laura, to the using data, we have the software allows us to see accessibility percentages for every course and every module. And you can see there's a quick snippet of a picture that says 82%, which was excellent. But of course, we do strive to be 100% accessible, because that's what we should do. So our reports, it gave us a real understanding across the university and within individual departments of how accessible we really were. And this was extremely valuable when we could talk to individual tutors and departmental groups, because we could use it to create action plans from, and we could use it to showcase success. And it became really easy to spot what were the stepping points, really, what were the easy fixes, what people were struggling with. And because we could do that, we were able to talk to individuals and groups and literally provide them with positive achievements to fulfill. So moving on to you, Laura, now. You can tell them a little bit how we managed to send all of our work from beyond legislation into something better.
Thanks, Sonia. So
I'll just give you your 10 minutes. You've got 10 minutes remaining, just to let you know.
No problem, thank you. So as Sonia mentioned just before regarding like the Build Accessible campaign, I think that was like well established at that point. We were very aware that we had this toolkit developed. We were constantly seeking to develop our internal staff-facing wiki pages, which again are really comprehensive. Lots of support there and guidance for staff in terms of what accessibility means, useful web pages to refer to, lots of content that I think the team had created themselves as well. And again, sessions were regularly offered and are still offered today regarding build accessibility. So what we're doing going forwards and thinking about going beyond the legislation is, I'm not too sure how long ago, but an accessibility network was set up. And this network is across the university, so no longer just staff from library and learning services, but from staff across a range of departments, from both academic departments to support services too. And these were staff really who expressed an interest in accessibility. Either they produce a lot of content, they're responsible for external facing web pages, or those who just were interested in it and wanted to support this legislation, but to really enhance it at the university too. So yes, so the accessibility network is still running. The members of the network meet, they used to meet I think on a fortnightly basis, I think it's a monthly basis now, to catch up about particular campaigns, strategies, to inform them about new sessions, new content that has been created, and then really to feed it back to their departments. So again, spreading the word of accessibility, the importance, and again, really advocating that it is just now normal practice. It's not best practice anymore, it's just normal good practice. That we should ensure that any content that we produce, that we've always got accessibility in mind. So a little bit of success as well. In May of this year, it was Global Accessibility Awareness Day, often referred to as GAD. And as part of that day, everyone across like various like higher education institutions could register. And we registered, and as part of that day, Edge Hill encouraged staff to log on to Blackboard to make changes. It was in association with Blackboard Ally, by the way, this Global Accessibility Awareness actual competition that we entered. And we were really proud that we got the third in Europe for the most fixes made on that day, which is a fantastic achievement. And again, it was just increasing and I think raising awareness about accessibility and the importance of it. And something a little bit more recently is the student internship. So I delivered a presentation with my colleague Leah a little bit earlier this morning. And as part of the student internship, we recruited 40 students over the summer for 12 weeks to work across various departments on a range of identified projects. But the reason why I mentioned the student internship as part of today's presentation is because lots of those students and departments actively sought to improve accessibility for their Blackboard modules. And this is something that myself and Leah are currently reviewing at the moment, but looking at the changes to accessibility and the number of changes. But even in a short period of time, the students made a fantastic number of fixes to content. I think they worked on over 550 different modules. And again, we're able to see the overall accessibility score of the university continue to increase. And I think that's because there's been a real push and a real strive to get the message about accessibility out there. But I think just a better understanding of what accessibility actually means and why it's still important that we should instill it into our everyday working practices. So I think that's everything from myself and Sonia for now, unless you have anything to add, Sonia. I was just going to move over to my next slide if anybody has any questions they would particularly like to ask. But thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Laura and Sonia. It was really, really interesting. If anybody has any questions, they'd like to raise the hand, we can come to you and you can ask your question.
All gone quiet out there, hasn't it?
Yeah. I've got one, obviously. I always have one. You talk about all this work that you were undertaking that obviously involved all the academics and getting them on board. As the library, were you the only sort of department that was doing that, or were there other people across the main university encouraging that sort of accessibility, across everything else, or was it left to the library to do it all?
I would say yes, to be honest. Yeah, we do have a large voice over the entire university, even though the majority, I work for academic engagement, so mine is mainly the academics, but through the academics we get to the students, and through our work we start student engagement as well, and they do an awful lot of work with the students. But other than that, Laura's work, she promotes, that's from the LTD, promotes it to all support staff. So they are quite keen to contact us. They know to contact us. It is the major route. We provide most of the staff development in that area. It doesn't go to anybody else because LTD are pretty much the experts on it. So there's a lot of support staff that come to us personally to ask for our opinions.
That's what I was going to say. Have you found that it's sort of spread, not only like to the academics that you're trying to target, obviously, but to other people who are using, various support systems across the university, and
most definitely
support. Yeah,
I'd say even people who put up just formatted documents onto the website for people to fill in, they now need to make them accessible, and they didn't know that before. And so filtering through our work and our communication, they know that now and they'll come to us. So there's a lot of, everybody in the university has been affected by it. I think everyone personally has been and should be, really. That's the way it is. It is the norm now. And it's nice that it's become the norm. It's nice that people are asking us, how do I change to be better?
And I think as well, just to add to that, I think something that's been really useful, especially for academics when they're creating the new modules on Blackboard, as soon as they upload anything, they will get a little indicator telling them if it's accessible. So arguably, if staff were uploading something in the red zone or in amber, it was a really good indication for them to actually question why is it not accessible, and to seek out support. So yeah, as Sonia said, LTD offer lots of staff development and training sessions. That's one of the main aspects of my role. So accessibility is just now another session that's been added to that. And again, I think it's become a very core session for staff. And they come quite a few times as well. They see it as a refresher opportunity to learn new tips and new strategies. And I think we've worked quite closely with other services, like even IT services as well, about raising the profile of accessibility amongst users who might get in contact and have questions. So even though I think we've had a really good part of it in library and learning services, definitely it's been a real collective, I think, agenda across the university. As showcased really, I think, in the accessibility network, which I think has been a really positive outcome of that.
I'd say as well, it's had a few offshoots as well. The number of digital skills we've had to teach now.
Definitely.
Copyright as well. All of a sudden comes up. Why can't I just copy this over there? So it's led to many other different campaigns in it as well, which has been very useful. And it's also shown the capability of what is out there in the university, what they know already and what they don't. And it's allowed us to go back and create a good action plan and the department's action plans for what they need in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's given you a really good opportunity and showcased so much of the work that you do in the library, and opened that conversation to everybody, that it becomes the norm, like you said in your presentation. It is the norm, and it should be. So yeah, it's great. Thank you for that. So we have got a question. Catherine has got a question. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. Thanks, Sonia and Laura. It's really interesting. I work at the University of Huddersfield, and we started using Ally with our VLE, which is Brightspace, I think just before the pandemic. And, like you say, it's great because it gives academics this dashboard which tells them how accessible or not, their content is. But I think what we found here is that they're saying, okay, I know this is not accessible. Can you fix it for me? And I wondered whether you'd had that. I think maybe from what you've said about having to teach some of these skills, you might have had to do a lot of that work for people. But do you feel like the message has got across that they need to do it themselves?
Yeah, and that's a hard one, Catherine. That's a good question, because arguably, if you have a PDF document that's 0% accessible, I think to myself, oh, I'm quite good on PDFs now. It wouldn't take me very long to make that accessible, no problem. But yeah, it's definitely been about teaching those skills to staff. So really encouraging staff to come to sessions, promoting the range of toolkits, the wiki pages we have. I've done lots of one-to-ones as well with staff to support them with that. And I think I found, Catherine, that just through experience, I think having those one-to-ones with staff has really increased their knowledge of accessibility, how to make it more accessible, make those quick fixes. And then sometimes you don't really hear from them very much then, because actually they've been able to get on with it. And when we look at the Blackboard, they've made some fantastic progress in terms of accessibility. But yeah, it definitely is a change of mindset, Catherine. So best of luck getting all the queries from staff about how to fix PDFs and Word documents. I'm sure lots will come.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've made it very clear from the very start that we don't have the capacity to do it all as well. And I know in many departments, they've got themselves ambassadors to be the ones to go to for help as well as us. And that's helped a lot too. But no, we definitely can't do it for them, can we? Yeah,
but I think, like you say, that it's the changing mindsets, isn't it, ultimately? So yeah, thank you.
No problem. And just to add to that as well about changing mindset, when we had the student interns, some of them produced some fantastic content, and some in the Faculty of Education have actually produced a podcast because they have accessibility needs. So they're actually talking about why accessibility is so important to them. So how they use a screen reader, what a good document reads aloud to them, what a bad document produces. So I think actually getting the student voice as well has been extremely valuable, I think, to enhance and support the Build Accessible campaign.
Yeah, the student voice is very important, and it's often heard a lot quicker and before us. The students ask for it, they need to get it.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that as well. I think the student voice is the way forward with things that you're trying to push or you're trying to get people on board with. Hearing it from them and telling their stories of how it affects them and or how it enables them is fantastic. And I think that's a really valuable. They're a really valuable asset when we're doing anything like creating new things or having to push out new ways of working or in this case legislation really.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. Great. So do we have any more questions, or anybody wants to say anything or talk about anything? We have got a few minutes available still before the final remarks from Rosie. I will put the link to that in here, so you've got it. You can click to it easily then if you need it. Does anybody have anything or anything anybody wants to say? No. Okay,
well, thank you for having us, though.
Very welcome.
It's
It's
nice
been great
to
to have you. Yeah, so if we just show our appreciation and say thanks to Laura and to Sonia and to Time for their presentations. Really, really thought-provoking and really, really useful as well. I think that's one of the great things. I think there's lots of things for all of us today to be able to go away and think about and use and go and follow up on some of the links and the things that you've provided. It's really great. So thank you very much, and thank you for everybody attending the session. We really appreciate it. We are coming very close to the end of the conference. So as I mentioned, Rosie's closing remarks will be at past. The link I've just posted, it's probably just gone up a little bit in the chat. Otherwise, you can access it from the timetable. So we hope you've had a great time. You might have a few minutes if you want to go and get a coffee or go to the loo or whatever, and then come back for her to be in that session. We'll just remind everybody that we'd love to hear your views about the conference. So there is a feedback survey in the feedback channel that's in the main Teams area. We'll also probably email one out if you don't have time to do it today. That's absolutely fine. online. Rosie will also be announcing the 5 winners of the prizes from the treasure hunt, which is quite exciting as well. So I hope you've all had a good time in this session, and we hope to see you again. So, yep, I'll say goodbye and I'll close the session. I'll see you over in the general room for Rosie's closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.